Hey guys, we are going to be continuing on the Is It Good series, and this is again part of the CCL Season 2. This is still from Week 1. This particular game is on Cursed Hollow, and we are going to be following Mochrie. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with this series, the idea of this series is to be a spiritual successor to my old series of Why the Pros Play. Despite the fact that there is no Blizzard-sponsored pro scene, there are still professionals that are making a living streaming and making content in Here's the Storm, or ones that are aspiring to be that. And this is part of the Community Clash League. They bring in a lot of members of the community that are trying to make it as streamers, content creators, or just people that play a lot of the games, writing guides, everything like that. So, with that being said, the idea of this is to look at a playstyle of a particular player as well as how they play a particular hero to see, is it good? Should we learn from it? Should we emulate it? Should we go with that? Naturally, I'm going to be picking people who are rather good players and builds that they bring to competitive areas, because there is money at stake in this. So they want to bring builds that they have the highest chance winning at, and these are the builds that you should try to emulate if you can. But there have been times in the past where I said, well, the playstyle was good, but you might not want to do the build because of blank reasons, and that's what we're going to be looking at. So to start off, I am still a firm believer in the W build on Hanzo if you're willing to learn it. The W build on Hanzo in the pro scene, by the end of the pro scene, was used as a hyper carry. What that means is that they could draft 2 tanks, 2 supports, and literally have just a Hanzo, and Hanzo would do enough damage to account for all of the other damage that you're missing by drafting 2 tanks and 2 supports. And that W build was so strong because it did a ton of poke damage, but out of nowhere you could quickly land a W against a wall on anyone that's close to a wall. So for example, we can see how close Kyle Ferguson or Tarask, I'm sure I'm butchering the name of the name, but you can see how close he is to that wall. If you learn the angles, you can immediately do about 35% of a tank's health in W build in a second. Following up with a Q and an auto attack does half of a tank's health with low cooldown abilities at a low range. And that's why W build is so powerful. However, I did talk to Mochrie after this game because I was curious why he decided to go with auto attack build and why he does go with auto attack build so much. And Mochrie said, honestly, if you want to play Hanzo at a competitive level, you need to know W build. And in fact, you should practice in W build. And I might be misquoting him on this one, but I'm pretty sure he was the one that said this. He said, in fact, even if you want to play any of the other builds, auto attack build or Q build, you should still practice W build first so that you get good Ws in all of your builds, because it's such a powerful ability to be able to land those scatter shots. But then he also told me, he said, but the reason that I went for auto attack build here and why I go for auto attack build a lot is primarily because it's an easier build to play that requires a little bit less thought, but I can still get a lot of value off. And he says, you normally wouldn't want to go with something like that in a competitive game. However, I was the shot caller for this game, so I wanted to make sure that I could pay attention to everything that the enemies were doing, everything my team was doing, all the camp timers, and throughout all of that, I didn't want to have to be worried about aiming my Ws and landing the perfect ones all the time. I'd rather worry about focusing on auto-attacking to get all of my value. There are downsides to the auto-attack build, though. One is that you have to stay at a range that is easy for people to jump on you at all times. And 2, at the late game, if you die, you lose your quest at the beginning, this redemption quest, and it's a lot easier to stack before people are level 10, before people can jump on you and do a ton of damage, than it is at the end of the game, where if you get close enough to get 2 auto attacks, you're likely going to die. So redemption is one of those that can get very tricky if the game goes a little too long and you end up dying. However, with all of that being said, let's talk a little bit about how you're going to be approaching the early, mid, and late game, and then we'll get into the full build. So, the early game on Hanzo, your goal is to do one of 2 things. Your goal is to stack your redemption, which means that you need to hit someone twice with auto attacks. That's your number 1 goal. You want to be doing that as often as you possibly can. The number 2 goal is to make sure that you're still working on macro, because you are filling the assassin role for your team, and in many cases you're covering either the mage role role or the auto attacker role. Usually an auto attack build, you're going the auto attack role, but you may be covering both of the mage build and the auto attacker when you draft Hanzo. So your goal should be making sure that your team keeps up on the macro. That means that you might be covering a couple lanes of soak, double soaking. Like you can see, Mochrie keeps grabbing bottom lane soak and then jumping mid to try to get a couple stacks. And this is all things that you should be focusing on when you're playing in the early game as Hanzo. Get that soak, and then make sure that you're getting stacks as much as you can, and play safe. You have to remember that Redemption will lose 3 stacks upon death. So you never want to die in the early game because it's going to set you back very far. So you need to be playing very safe. You see, whenever he pushes forward, he will always throw vision behind him to make sure that he has an area to get away. One other thing that you're going to notice about Mochrie is that whenever he takes any hit, he always immediately walks to a wall so that he can use his natural agility. And this is a way that you can also play Hanzo to make sure that you are getting extra value. Hanzo's not really a flanking mage or a flanking auto attacker. He has long enough range you can play the game front to back, which means you can just attack their front line and go forward. But he was already in that position, so he decided to kind of help out there and kind of go from that position. Anyways, they start going in this way, and he goes right back to soaking, and he's at 6 out of his 12 that he needs. I would say this is a little slower than you would usually stack this, but he is covering the soak for his team. So normally when you're trying to stack Redemption, you usually have it done by level 10, because you're usually just following around the enemy tank and getting that done, but he's focusing heavily on macro to make sure that his team doesn't need to worry about that. To talk about the early talents that he takes Redemption, so he can get that extra attack speed. Then he goes into Ignore All Distractions. Now, I think arguably you could also go into Explosive Arrow in auto attack build, but he ends up going with Ignore All Distractions. Now, I want to talk about this particular call right here. So, when you are getting level 10s before the enemy team, and you're on the 3rd curse, or the 3rd tribute, which will lead to a curse, that means you're guaranteed to win this next tribute. And that means that you're going to get a curse. So the enemies have 2 choices. They can try to win a 9 versus 10, which is rare. Or they could go into the Hail Mary play where they go for a boss and you get a curse and now you have to deal with their boss. So Mochrie ends up making the call of going for a boss now, because if the enemy team ends up going for their boss in the Hail Mary play, because they're not going to try to take this, so they take the safer route and just give the objective and go for a boss, then they're going to have a boss and a curse for free, while the enemy team isn't going to have anything. I mean, they'll have 1 boss. So it'll be bosses traded, except for you also have a curse. You can almost ignore their boss and pretty much grab a keep with this. So this is a very strategic plan in knowing what the main strategy is for the enemy team. However, I do recommend in a play like this, he should use his E over here so you can still see when the enemies are rotating up this way, and also see if they try to go for this boss play. It comes out a little late, and so he does end up seeing the enemies, but unfortunately, he wasn't able to like scout them out and then blow them up afterwards. He does take Dragon's Arrow, fires off a Dragon's Arrow to stun a couple people, and now he's just doing as much damage as possible. He's sticking with them. You see that he's moving in between each auto attack, making sure that he's getting close to the enemies, and he sticks with them wherever they're trying to go. One thing that he does quite often is he fires off his auto attack, moves while channeling his Q, and then lands his Q and then immediately auto attacks again, because you got to remember the way that Hanzo's auto attack works. You have to wait for this bar to go all the way down before you can fire off an auto attack. So you can actually charge up your Q while this bar is going, and it's something that you can certainly learn from while playing Hanzo. So you don't have to miss out on your auto attack damage to land a Q. Now, because the enemies sniffed out this play from Mochrie, they were actually able to grab this tribute, making it to where they didn't get that like crazy like boss into curse, blah blah blah, all that stuff. But they did still get a boss off of that, and they didn't lose very much. They traded evenly, so that was not bad. This camp that was also picked up was able to get this fort, and that's a benefit of doing a lot of macro for your team. Is he was able to double soak so that his team was able to go for the cams, which is really nice. So because of that call, he was able to take a fort down at bottom lane, and that boss up at top lane destroyed all of the front walls. So he's at a really, really good spot for this game. He continues to double soak for his team, keeping them up in experience. I don't think he's going to have the highest experience. Yeah, he does. Okay, so he has the highest damage, and experience. as well as he hasn't died yet, so he's in a really good spot. I believe he also has the highest kills as well. So, and this is the thing about Mochrie too. Like, I know I make a lot of jokes that Mochrie is like a Tracer 1 trick and that's about it, but Hanzo is probably his second. I don't know if it's his second most played, but I see Hanzo. I would imagine like Tassadar is his second most played, but I know Hanzo is one that he plays a lot whenever Tracer gets banned, and he's a pretty good Tracer player. So in this case, we do see Zul using that. He was staying back. So if you're unfamiliar about this positioning with Hanzo, you stay at the range where your ult will get the most amount of damage and stun, while also staying near a wall. So you could fire your ult, and then you can immediately jump over this wall and follow up your own stun. And so if you don't know how Dragon's Arrow works, if Dragon's Arrow fires and it's at a very close range, it only does 200 damage and stuns for half a second. After it's traveled a medium distance, which this is kind of what it should look like. I don't have my paint out, but let's get paint out. Let's get our crayons out, guys. Let's get some Blues Clues action in here. So the basic idea of Hanzo Arrow, let me go back in here. Let me go out like this. So Hanzo is right here. And so his arrow, if it's fired at about this range, that's short range. If it's fired at about this range, it's medium range. And if it's fired anywhere beyond that, it is long range. So if you saw the positioning that he was in, he was staying right about here, and he was expecting to land a long range arrow right about here. And then he was going to quickly jump over this wall and then be right in the range of whatever he hit with his ult. So you can see he's calling out his targets, but he's also positioning in a way that he can land those arrows. So that's the basic idea of what he's trying to go for here. He wants to always back up. You can see that he's backing up in between each of these so that he can make sure that he lands a good arrow. He then fires his arrow off, lands a good stun, and he gets his redemption done. Now, after redemption's done, he did lose the Mouth Ale relatively early, so they may need to back off this fight. He's also having some mana problems, so he tries to go for an interrupt onto the objective, but he ends up getting it blocked by that Zul. He goes for a fountain. It's usually okay to pick up a fountain right after an objective because there's usually about a 1 to 2 minute time in between objectives, so he'll likely have a fountain backup like halfway through the next objective. The next objective is bot, so he could go for that camp, and it looked like he wanted to jump over for that camp, but then he decided not to because mid was pushing in and he didn't want to lose any experience. He's staying very far away because he did take Ignore All Distractions, and what Ignore All Distractions does is you will kill a minion in one attack, and then after you kill a minion, you gain 2 range. So you can stay further back, and with Redemption, you can wipe out a wave rather quickly. Then he took Sharpened Arrowheads. Every time that he basic attacks or hits with his Storm Bow, it reduces their armor by 2 for 3 seconds, and it stacks up to 20. So it's a good way to kind of tear apart a little bit of armor, and it's nice in the auto attack build. Dragon's Arrow, again, stuns at a longer range, stuns for more the longer range that it goes. And then we have Fleet of Foot. Now, Fleet of Foot is commonly picked up in the Q build because it gives you extra movement speed every time that you land a Q, and you're often going to be landing a lot of Qs. However, Mochrie likes to take this in auto attack build because it allows him to move around fights a lot quicker, and it's easy to land his Qs in auto attack build because he auto attacks someone, moves closer, and then hits him with an instant Q or a very short channeled Q, and then immediately starts auto attacking again. So I do find him taking this talent quite a bit in this particular build. We see an ult going out. It was a miss. He was trying to end up hitting the Lunara at very low health, but he wasn't able to do that. However, even with that missed arrow, look at how much damage he just did in that fight. He constantly hit the same target over and over and over, which made it very difficult to heal. He's also quickly following this target to make sure to take out a second one. If he were to have taken the Ninja Assassin, he actually probably could have gotten a third kill on Lunara there, but he would have had to do it through the healing of a white main and a gray main, which most likely wouldn't have actually happened. I just realized white main, gray main. We need like a red main, right? Isn't that from Final Fantasy? Or a like a, I don't know, yellow mane? That just means that like a, I don't know, like a wolf just like peed on itself or something. A yellow mane? I don't know. Anywho, the yeah, so he probably wouldn't have been able to do too much there. I like the siege damage that this build brings because Hanzo a lot of times is argued to have like really low structure damage because all he really has is auto attack and Q. His W doesn't do anything to structures. So you can usually lack that, and that's probably because people are normally trying to go that W build. And so it's now in this build he can do a decent chunk to structures, and it's not too bad. There is a little bit going on with this boss right here, and they're worried that people are going to be going for it, but they don't see anyone in this vision area, so they decide to try to just make a like sit here in a small spot. Now, the thing about this is, where is that wisp, right? Do the enemies know? They don't know, right? Yeah, they don't know. Now, the wisp is right here on the boss. It's not in the bush here. So they can try to go for a boss play, but this is going to be very tricky. So remember, these are in the competitive games. They're all in voice comms. They're all trying to make these huge plays. The wisp ends up coming over, forcing them to make their play maybe a little bit earlier than they wanted to. They probably were going to make that play after the backline spread out a little bit more, but now they have to immediately make this play. So Mochrie now has two choices, because when you start reaching the middle game, you start hitting a lot of team fights. You have two choices when you're playing Hanzo in this situation. You can immediately start doing damage and auto attack a Q, or you can immediately try going for an ult, which a great ult would be for him to take a step back, fire an ult, and then hop over this wall and get some extra damage. There is also some interesting wall shenanigans you can do to just gain distance without actually jumping over a wall. For example, this wall looks like, let me wait till it moves back. This wall looks like this, right? Well, here's the thing. You can jump over this tiny little edge right here. So if you're standing right here, you can jump to like here. And I know it sounds kind of weird because you're technically jumping forward, and you're not jumping over anything, but this is a trick that you can do to kind of jump forward without actually needing to go over a structure, because sometimes going over structures is going to put you in a bad position. So finding angles like that you can jump over allows it to where you get to just kind of go forward with your team without needing to actually go forward. Same thing here. The wall looks something like this. So if you're standing here, you can jump over this little corner, which means that you're technically jumping like this. And so all of those things are ways that you can jump kind of forward if you want to do that on Hanzo. So he decides to go for a shorter range ult and just go with those auto attacks. Again, he likes to sustain damage exactly where he wants it to go. He jumps over the wall because he saw that a lot of the enemies were just running straight towards him, and he didn't want to have to deal with that. He's keeping his damage focused. Again, he focuses on one target at a time, making sure that the damage that he does get off is exactly where he wants it. Despite losing his tank and his bruiser, he was still able to do so much damage and wipe through their team. We see him now with 7 kills, 3 assists, and he also has 70,000 siege damage that's been keeping his team in the game, as well as his 10,000 experience gained, and he also has 40,000 hero damage. And that's not 40,000 random hero damage that you see a lot of Hanzos do. This is 40,000 damage on the targets that he wants to die. He focuses on the very specific targets, and he will stick on them for a long period of time. They decided to go for a double boss play as it's just a little bit safer, but the downside is that if the tribute starts spawning relatively soon, then they're going to have to stop this boss and immediately go to the tribute. But we'll see how it goes. This build is also not bad for taking out bosses because your attack speed's so fast and his attack damage is so high. His attack damage is 372, so you can see that he does hit for quite a bit. I guess that's a roundup because he's actually hitting for 371 on this, but it's very high auto attack damage. He's going, again, making all of these calls for his team, making sure that they're getting something of value every little bit. Level 13, level 16, we did see the fleet of foot. Level 16, we see flawless technique. Now, this is, again, a very high damage, high burst ability that's good if you need that single target damage. What it does is when you land an auto attack, your next Q does 30% more damage. When you land a Q, your next auto attack does 30% more damage. So you can do a lot of damage. Now, the thing to note about this is you need to hit heroes with this. So you can't just do this to speed up wave clear. And you don't need to hit the same hero. So you hit hero with Stormbow, and it empowers your next basic attack against anything, right? And then same thing, you hit a basic attack on a hero, and it buffs your Stormbow against anything. So that's pretty much how it's going to work out. Now the enemies, they're not going to fight over a lot of these because, I mean, they could fight over this one, honestly. They're just too far away. Because they are even talent tiers if they wanted to go for it. Either way, that is pretty much what's going to be happening with that. They're going to go for another ambush here. You can see they make a lot of these plays a lot. Now, once again, watch his positioning. He uses his vision first to get vision on everyone. They realize that he's got vision, so they all decide to run away. You see all of them immediately turning to get out. He gets in the position where he can land the long duration stun. He fires off the long duration stun. He immediately goes in, lands a Q, lands an auto attack, goes for a W, auto attack, misses a Q, lands an auto attack, takes out 2 targets, and they can kind of just roll through at this point. So they decide to take out this keep here. The tribute is spawning, which won't give them really too much, especially since they're going to be able to take out a structure for free here. So they could go back and they could go for the tribute. They could actually try to close out the game if they want to. They did have to use a lot of cooldowns for this, but they are against a team that's down 2 people. However, they decided to take the safer route here and just go for a second keep. Getting 2 keeps down is going to make it really hard for the opposing team to get back from this, but the downside about this is that it's going to devalue curses. Because if you have no keeps, your curses aren't really worth it, but you still need to get it so the enemies don't get it. It looks like they go for like maybe another play, but then they see everyone show up down here in the bottom and they're like, oh, we're not going to be able to do that. So they just go over here. I've seen Hanzo just use their trait just to get over some of this stuff a little bit faster and immediately start channeling, but he's pretty, I would say, conservative when it comes to his trait usage. So he doesn't usually want to use it, even in times where like there won't be a fight in 30 seconds. He's just like, if I don't need it, I'm not going to use it. And but I will see a lot of pros that will just use it to save some time. So they'll hop over, immediately channel when they know there's not going to be a fight in 30 seconds because it just saves time. Either way, though, he's pretty good at handling a lot of these situations. Now they play safe because they're waiting for level 20s. So this wave's already pushed out, this wave's already pushed out, so they're just staying mid, all safe, not worrying about anything. The opposing team, this is their time to try to go for a gank. This is exactly what this team's trying to do. They're like, maybe we can fight them before 20s. And then finally they're just like, you know what? They're going to play way too safe. We're not going to be able to gank them before 20s. And that's exactly what's happening there. Is they're just not going to let that happen. Now, the next tribute is up. This will be a curse for either team, which means this is something that either team needs to fight over. Technically, red team doesn't need to actually fight over this, though, because they could just kind of sit back and chill, get 20s, and they could give up the curse, because one curse isn't going to end the game for them. However, they are approaching level 20s, and they're like, we could just go and fight this. And this fight right here could be the end. And this is where he's going to stay back, and he's going to pick up the global talent. I've seen Mochrie take both play of the game and bullseye. I generally only take bullseye if we're going against someone that I need to interrupt. Something like a mosh pit, because when this is moving faster, with bullseye, because it increases the arrow's speed, it's really easy to stun a mosh without needing to use an ult. So I'll sometimes take bullseye for like moshes or for like anything like that. So, but play the game is just a really powerful talent. You can fire off the ult, you have global potential, and you have a lot of extra damage, because if you hit a bunch of heroes, press R again, you're going to do an extra 300 damage, which is about 10% of a backline's health. So if they get hit by an ult that's already going to be doing 800 damage plus 300, you're doing about a third of a backliner's health. So right here, we see, once again, he positions so that he can land a strong stun. He uses play of the game to get that extra damage, and then he takes out Mal'Ganis while Mal'Ganis was silenced, and is able to take them out before anything happens. He goes back, interrupts the Lunara, but ends up getting in a bad position and gets blown up by Lunara. However, the play that he did in the beginning allowed his team to be able to take this entire game. So this is really what we're looking at. Mochrie's Hanzo, is it good? Yes, it's good. Is the build good? I personally think that if you're not the shot caller, you probably should try to practice W build. And the method that I recommend people practice W build is by using the same style that basketball players use to train when they're going for their free throws. So if you've ever seen, let me see if I can pull up a... So, for example, if we were to show this, there are a lot of angles in basketball, okay? And there are several types of angles that you go for, and a lot of these you need to train it to be muscle memory. So if you can see this, for example, if you're going for a free throw, there's a specific angle you go for that will land. And if you get that angle and you can practice that angle every single time, then you're good. But there's another type of angle that you need to know, which is one that I'm surprised I'm not seeing this time. Here we go. So right here, if you're firing the shot off, oh no, this is wrong. Let me see if I can find. There was a specific one that I used in the past. Here it is. Um, so you can see that there are specific angles that it recommends to pass to, and right here's the one that we want to actually be talking about is this angle right on the side. So this particular angle, if you practice it enough, you can always land the shot by hitting it right to the top right of where the actual basket is. And if you get this down to muscle memory, meaning that you can throw this shot out and land it every single time, then all you have to do is make sure that you end up in that spot and your team passes to you, right? And you can land that shot every time. This is a common strategy that we see in college basketball that is repeated over and over and over. Well, the same idea works with Hanzo, right? Instead of always sitting around and you're standing here and you're going, okay, well, if I fire my W here, it's gonna go like this, right? And then if I fire it, like instead of trying to take your whole time to aim it, what you should instead do is memorize angles, right? There should be 3 angles that you always know, and you should reposition as your W is coming off cooldown to where you always get in those angles. Imagine that your W coming off cooldown is your team passing the ball to you, and you should always adjust for that. So, for example, if you memorize this angle right here and you memorize like I find the side like close to wall angles are the easiest to memorize because if you get close to a wall yourself and this is a whole wall, then the angles that you know is spread damage is close to wall, and then focus damage with a target that's near a wall, you just fire it right before you hit that target. Those are easy to memorize. So being close to the wall, memorize all of these. Being like right here out in the open, you're going to need to memorize again a couple still wall shots, because if you memorize these, and it's not just memorizing, you need to commit this to muscle memory to where your subconscious is kind of leading you to do this on your own. And that's the biggest thing about practicing W build. Now, while he didn't go W build, I'm going to mention, is Mochrie's Hanzo good? Yes. Is this build good? Yes. But W build is still better, in my honest opinion, and Mochrie's even said the same thing. The reason why you don't want to go W build is either you haven't practiced Hanzo enough, or you need to do like the shot calling for your team, or you're just playing with friends and you don't want to like take all this effort. But it shouldn't require too much effort. It just requires a lot of practice, and perfect practice. However, is this build good? I think this build is great for like solo queue. I really do. I think this build is amazing for solo queue because it's so easy to get the damage on the targets you want. I can't tell you how many Hanzos go W build, go Q build. They top all the charts, but the targets that they want to kill aren't dying. This build makes sure that the targets you're targeting are dying, especially after you complete redemption, especially after you get flawless technique. Whatever you're aiming at dies. That's just what happened with Mochrie. Then use the same ideas that he used with play the game. Throw your vision out pretty far out first, back up before you fire your ult, and you can use your trait to close that gap if needed. Overall, though, his build is good, his playstyle is great, and I still would recommend learning W build by utilizing the same way that basketball players practice their angle shots. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to check out all of the rest. I didn't talk about it in the last video, but you guys can also check out CCL every Wednesday at 6 p.m. PST, where you get to see all of these awesome teams play against each other for a good chunk of prize money. It's a ton of fun. I'm one of the casters for that event. Baja's the other caster for that event, so you get to see 2 of your favorite casters as well. And again, it's a really, really fun event that keeps this entire scene going. So make sure to check that out, and also feel free to check out any of my other videos that I've got, because I will be trying to bring them out twice a week for Heroes of the Storm, and maybe a psychology video peppered in there here and there. So thank you guys so much, and feel free to check out anything else.